Communication on the whole, I am so passionate about the way we communicate. I believe that there's nothing that can't be resolved through communication, but storytelling is the most effective kind of communication because it's really how we resonate with one another, how we connect to one another's experiences, and how we remember each other's experiences. Like our brains work in stories, and so we remember that.
Today, we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling and how brands and businesses can use that more effectively to not only elevate their businesses, but also have a greater and more positive impact on the world. We'll be getting some amazing advice from a brand strategist herself, Sophie Lee of Electric Peach. Let's dive in, and I hope you love this episode. Thank you very much, Sophie, for being here today with me. Usually this is the Roche and Viren podcast. The and Viren isn't here with us today. So I've just got the amazing Sophie with me today as my guest. And yeah, I'm really, really excited for this one because we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling. So this is really, really exciting. And just before we start, I wanted to ask you, so we started our podcast with the intention to inspire people, whether that's in their business or personal goals, to break through limiting beliefs and also to soar high. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what, in just a couple sentences, what does it mean for you to soar high?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. Yeah. What does it mean for me to soar high? Okay. Yeah. Do you know what? And actually, this ties in perfectly with what we're going to be talking about today. It's all about self-expression and being the most expansive version of your own version of brilliant. I think we spend so much time trying to put ourselves in boxes and be somebody else's version of brilliant. And for me, soaring high is the feeling of my own expansion into that and my own creative self-expression as a result of that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And so we will jump straight into our power of storytelling. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, throughout human history, why do you think storytelling is so important? And how do you think it's helped us evolve as a species?
This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So we evolved because of our ability to tell stories. Storytelling is fundamental to our survival and to the evolution of Homo sapiens. We were the only Homo species who were able to communicate en masse outside of our immediate tribe. So that meant that we weren't the strongest, we weren't the cleverest, we didn't have the best tools. The only reason that we survived over other Homo species is because of our ability to communicate. So when you think about that and you think about how storytelling has shown up over history, from cave drawings to papyrus to the first newspapers to where we are today and social media, it is literally the most fundamental part of every single society in every single way. And that's why I love it. Like for me, it's, communication on the whole. I am so passionate about the way we communicate. I believe that there's nothing that can't be resolved through communication. But storytelling is the most effective kind of communication because it's really how we resonate with one another, how we connect to one another's experiences, and how we remember each other's experiences. Like our brains work in stories, and so we remember that, and we take that on to the next part of our personal or group collective evolution.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, if we look at us as human beings, I mean, there are so many intelligent species here, but us as human beings, we've developed language and a way of sharing our experiences with people in a way that no other animal on this planet has. So it's just, it's really amazing. So yeah, thank you.
It is, but also animals do communicate with each other, and they do tell stories. They just do it in a different way. They don't have language, but they have, whales and dolphins, they have got language. They've got actually a lot of animals have their own version of language. But I think about even like my dog.
Yeah.
has her bark changes depending on what it is that she's trying to tell me. And
Yeah.
I think it's really cool when you start to understand how every species communicates with one another, and even
Yeah.
interspecies communications, and also how that is contextualized in the context of stories as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned dolphins. Viren at the moment, for some reason, is obsessed with orcas. So he's watching every documentary on orcas and just how they communicate. So yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's I don't know, what do you call them, like a school of dolphins, like dolphins and
Yeah.
whales that travel together in, I know it's a school of fish, but I don't know what it is for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's the whales and the dolphins, and they're going about their separate lives in the ocean until a specific point every year where they all come together,
Yeah.
and then they travel together for a period of time and talk to each other between the
Yeah.
dolphins and the whales. And
Yeah.
it's like they remember each other, and they're like, oh, hey, what have you been up to in the last year? Like, it's really cool.
Let's catch up. Yeah. Fantastic. That's really amazing. It's really amazing. And so much that we don't understand still to this day. So it's fantastic. Yeah. And could you give me examples of some businesses that you think have used storytelling successfully and effectively with their customers?
Well, I think one of the most famous example that springs to mind is Apple. When Steve Jobs left Apple for the first time and went to work at Pixar, the company really wasn't doing very well. They were trying to sell computers based on quite high level, I guess you could call it geeky communication that was like really alienating to people, because they didn't understand. Oh, there's a big spider. Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't understand what the hell they were talking about. So then he went to Pixar and he learned about the structure of storytelling and how telling a story in the context of a brand really just means that you're humanizing the brand experience, and you're talking to customers in a way that they will understand. So suddenly it went from, we're selling these high-tech computers and this is what you need to know about the computer, to this is what you need to know about how this computer is going to enhance your life. And then obviously they're not just computers, it's like a whole kind of a whole brand that has every type of technology that comes into it as a result of that. But it really, really shifted the impact of the brand and how people related to it. That's kind of probably the most famous example, but I would say that you can find storytelling in every single advertisement that you can think of. Like, if you think Coca-Cola has somehow become synonymous with Santa, like that storytelling, that's finding a way to match your brand and the experience of your brand with a story that people trust and recognize, and that brings together family and a sense of togetherness and all of these kind of things that you think of when you think of Coke. Or like when you think of Heinz, it's a similar thing as well. It's this idea of comfort. And like, I always think of my mum when I think of Heinz, like this kind of family sense of togetherness. And all of that is because of brand storytelling. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of these giant corporations, so I'm using them because I know that people will relate and understand that.
Yeah.
What an example of a brand that I do really love, that's used this really well, is Snag Tights. They identified that tights were not for everyone, that they often didn't fit all sizes, that they laddered really quickly. They weren't very sustainable because you wear them once or twice and you throw them away. And they're not particularly jazzy. You usually have like a denier, like whatever, and there's not like that many options. So Snag Tights created really jazzy tights across all different sizes, and their whole story is about inclusive sizing. And I'm just going to put my chair up. There we go.
Okay.
Inclusive sizing and vibrancy, and community, and also sustainability, and being conscious about your impact when you're buying clothes. And they've done a really good job of that because they've included lots of different communities in their brand storytelling. So, for example, the burlesque community are quite well affiliated with Snag. And if you go on Instagram, you can see lots of different, really vibrant, amazing people of all genders and all shapes and sizes showing off these fantastic tights. And it's really, I mean, this one person business was set up by a woman in Scotland, has made a huge impact in the UK. And all of it is because of really effective brand storytelling.
Yeah. I have to check it out. Snag Tights. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it. I actually feel like their brand communication strategy is a very inspiring one. I wholeheartedly recommend checking it out.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. Oh, sorry, shout out to Snag Tights. Yeah, that's amazing. Cool. And that actually moves me on to the next question. It's like, how could a business then use storytelling towards positive goals and beyond just making money?
So the kind of story arc, there's quite a few different ones. The most simple version is you've got the status quo, then you've got the conflict, and then you've got the resolution. There's also the hero's journey, which is essentially that, but a lot longer with lots of different elements that come in. But for simplicity, let's just look at the sort of 3-point story arc. When I work with our clients, I always say, what is the status quo that is problematic? Because I think we can probably all agree that the status quo is very problematic. And it might be something like the status quo is tights don't fit everybody, or the status quo is there's a lot of waste because of tights or clothes or what have you.
Yeah.
So that's the status quo. And then the conflict is when the status quo gets to the point where we can no longer deal with this. There's a point that something has to change. And we can look at the fact that the status quo, for example, with climate change, is that we have been consuming too much plastic and we have a very unsustainable lifestyle. The conflict is that climate crisis is becoming extremely scary. So something has to be done about it. And then the solution, which is your business, is what we're going to do about it. And it can be a really brilliant way of bringing people together as a kind of call to arms of this isn't working anymore, but here's what we can do about it. And here's what we can come together to drive change forward. So for purpose-driven businesses, storytelling is the most effective tool that we have for communicating, because it really clearly shows why you exist, and also because it's a really great way of engaging people and bringing people into your vision and your mission, and it's a way to be remembered. So when we use that structure, it's because of our evolution, people can remember better. Oh, this is that business, and this is why they're doing that, and this is why I need to get behind what they're doing.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, just you mentioning about being purpose-driven, it actually moves quite nicely onto the next question. Is like, what do you think would be the key to creating a compelling story that actually motivates people to take action? Like maybe some key things.
The key thing, the first and most important thing to remember is that you as a brand are not the hero. Your audience is the hero. So the story has to be in some way about them. It's not about you. You're like the container for the story. But really it's their story that we need to care about. So the first thing to do is to understand who they are, what their story is, and how to speak to their story and to bring their narrative into your narrative. Really, it's the sweet spot between your purpose and your story and their purpose and their story, and the bit that it meets in the middle is what we're looking for. So the first step for any purpose-driven business is always to understand your audience. And I see this step being skipped over far too quickly, far too often. And it's so vital, because if you don't do that, you could end up telling a story that doesn't resonate. Because there's many stories that we could tell, right? It's not necessarily about a good one or a bad one. It's about, does this resonate? Is this what people actually care about? And are we talking to the emotions that will most move those people to take action? And then also a really powerful brand story has an action. So it's not just storytelling for the sake of storytelling. There's a journey that we go on, and ultimately that's to drive an action. Of course, that action is also going to be about purchasing something if you're in the for-profit world, which I think is totally great. But it also might be, if you're in the non-profit world, it might be you want people to donate to you, or you might want people to drive your cause forward. So there's always going to be an outcome that you're looking for, and the story needs to lead the audience on the journey to the outcome.
I really liked how what you said about the audience, like we are the container, and that it's the audience and it's all about the audience. I really liked how you put it. I'm just butchering it now, but that was really amazing. So how do you think we could create empathy in storytelling to then really encourage people, or our audience, to take that action and address the larger societal problems that we have today?
I think, first of all, this comes from knowing your audience. So really understanding where they're at, what they need, and why maybe they're not taking action. I think that's also a really key thing. There's kind of two things on this, because one, if you're, for example, a social enterprise and your business exists to support a specific community, don't tell their story on their behalf. Like, I think that's really easy to fall into the trap of. Give them opportunities to tell their own story. People relate far better to people than they do to a brand, even when that brand is, brilliant and really ethical and doing all of these great things. So empower, not even empower, I hate the idea. We can't empower other people. They can only empower themselves. So it's about creating opportunities for people to be empowered to tell their story. And what I love the most is when brands use their platform as a way to raise up their audience. And I get to learn about this brand through the words of their audience rather than just them telling me. So that's one area. But also when we think about, for example, we talk a lot at the moment about how sustainability needs a rebrand. And we at Electric Peach did a big project for the UN around COP26, which was looking at why what they call the galvanizable middle, the kind of large majority of people who know about climate crisis but aren't taking action. Why aren't they taking action? How can we communicate with them in a way that is more inspiring and motivates them to take action? And what is wrong with the story we're currently saying? Because if it was effective, the story would be effective, but it's not. So the story is wrong. And so much of that came back to the fact that sustainability is actually quite elitist. It's not an even playing field. Sustainable choices are often more expensive. Not everybody has the education to understand it. When we talk to people, the stories that we're telling are like, you're wrong, and why don't you, like, kind of a very sanctimonious perspective. And then on the other side of it, we've got all this horror and this fear and this. And what do we know about humans when they're in a state of fear is like fight, flight, or freeze. So your response is either going to be like, it's not happening, or you're going to run away from it, or you're going to fight against it and get really angry that people are telling you that you've got to do these things because you're scared. And so the fear-mongering messages also don't work. So if we're talking about building empathy, it's really about understanding the psychology of human behavior and how our communication can have a huge impact one way or another in the actions that people take.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And so with even with social media and how that has risen over the past few years, how do you think storytelling has changed on social media and then the impact on like the business and social messaging?
Good question. So social media has really changed the landscape of storytelling because it's given the power to the people for whatever, however you feel about it, it has. It's taken everything that we relied upon for information was all dictated by the media. Now we can see information like videos, like on the ground reporting from people. And that means that we've got a myriad of different perspectives, a myriad of different angles of the story to build out our own version of the story by looking at everybody else's. So that's really interesting, actually, because it's shifted the way the media works in a fundamental way. I think brands who use this best are all looking at, like I said, with Snag Tights, they're looking at how they can get their audience involved in telling the story. So I'm a huge fan of user-generated content. I think it is one of the best ways, especially for B2C, to show the brilliance that you're doing. Show your audience in your clothes, for example, and loving them and like the vibrancy of the community that you've created. And get them involved in telling why they're so passionate about what you're doing. And social media can be a really good way of doing that because you can connect accounts with one another. You can follow the story through to different places. You can reshare different people's content. And also influencer marketing is another massive part of social media that has changed the game massively in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess this moves on to the next question quite nicely. So when we're crafting stories for important causes like sustainability, how are we able to stay genuine and authentic, but then also motivating action in our audience?
I'm really glad that you asked that, actually, because authenticity is the most important part of this. And I meant to say earlier in the context of empathy, it is so important to only tell the stories that are real and authentic to you and to your audience and not just go off on like some kind of purpose washing rampage. And how do we ensure that we're being authentic is literally by telling the truth. And when we work with businesses, because this is all we ever do, is looking at like, what's the story and how do we tell that story in a way that's going to be really compelling? But it starts with, what are you doing? Like doing good is an inside job. And what are you actually doing in your business? How are you operating? What genuinely interesting and amazing things are you doing? And then we can talk about that. We can tell the story of that. The problem is when we make up a story because we think it sounds good, and people can see straight through that. So like, I mean, my background is in journalism, which is why I'm so passionate about this as a structure. And it's the same, the same applies. With journalism, you find the story and you tell the story in the most compelling way, but you never misrepresent the facts. You can't. You could be in serious trouble if you do that. The same has to apply to business, but we don't have the same we don't have the same laws around business misrepresentation in the same way. Obviously, we do around product misrepresentation, but not so much around like purpose misrepresentation. So yeah, be authentic by actually doing the things you say you're doing, or better, do the things and then talk about them afterwards.
That's it, right? It's like leading by example. So, the last thing anybody, and it's like we said about authenticity, and when we fake anything, people can sniff right through that. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely a gut feel there that we human beings have. And you just know when a brand is leading by example and actually taking action themselves and then going, hey, this has worked for us. We'd love it for you to join us. So, yeah.
Exactly. And that has so much more impact.
Awesome. So how could we use storytelling to make issues like climate change more relatable and understandable for, I guess, a broader audience?
Well, first of all, we need to stop talking about the doom side of things. As I said already, that triggers a central nervous system response, and that could actually do the opposite of leading people to take action. We need a story of hope and togetherness, and that isn't just on businesses to talk about things like that. It's also the media and our governments. Like, we need unity in dealing with this situation, because this is going to affect all of us. Some of us are already being affected disproportionately, but it is going to affect all of us, and we need to all be brought into the story. And exactly like I was saying about bringing your audience in and making them crucial parts of the story, that's what we need to do as a society, rather than being like, oh, that's happening over there. That's not, that's not to do with me. Or you're wrong because you use single-use plastic. Or you're a bad person because you buy from Shein, or whatever. Like, these are the sorts of messages that people come out with. And all that's doing is pushing people into different sides and dividing us. And that is not cohesive to the narrative of hope and survival. So I really feel like there's a huge responsibility on the media as well as businesses to look at the narratives that they're telling. But the problem with that is those narratives don't sell anywhere near as much as the horror narratives sell, because people, well, it's just like that kind of like, driving past an accident and slowing down to look at the accident. That's just the way that human beings are programmed. So a story of we can do this hope and resilience isn't going to be as exciting. And one of my editors used to say sexy, the sexy side of the story. And so, these are my very idealistic perspectives. And I think it's important to say that it's idealistic because it's at odds with the way that humanity operates. I guess what I'm really hoping for is that we have enough people waking up to the power of their words and using their words intentionally to create, first of all, shared understanding, a shared narrative, not a I'm right, you're wrong narrative, but a narrative where we all get to have our truths and we all get to be heard as and accepted. And then the next stage of that is, okay, well, now we're together. Where are we going to take this? How are we going to be the solution to the conflict together rather than the conflict? And at the moment, we're in the conflict and we're the conflict.
I totally resonate with that, actually. And just touching back on how we use social media, I follow this brand in India, this business that takes microplastics and plastics that they've just found or people have collected at their home, and they ship them to this company, and they build bags and all these products from these gorgeous bags. And they use social media to create reels and videos to show, like, really educate people, actually, because they're like, okay, you've got this packet or this product you've bought like in a piece of plastic, and when you tear through it, this tiny, like, you know how sometimes you tear through it and you create this little like microplastic or tiny little bits of plastic? That's the issue. That's what's causing the problem in our oceans. And now, just by watching that video, I'm so conscious about how I'm just tearing through things. Like, I can't create these microplastics and keep everything into one chunky piece, and just little things like that, little things that I guess I was ignorant to it until I watched this Instagram reel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do something about this.
So how did they tell that story in a way that made you feel like you were being invited in and not made to be the problem?
So there's a woman just educating people, and she was just on this video, and it was just, she wasn't filling me with fear. She was just there sort of saying, hey guys, look, when I open these bits of plastic, just what you do at home, when you do this and don't do it this way, this is what's causing the problem in our oceans. here's what you can do today to start minimizing this, and to, and then also like, here's what we do. We create these beautiful products from you just even saving these microplastics and shipping them to us. And we'll create products from it that you can buy, and literally made from like little bits of plastic, these beautiful bags and other things they make. And they do it and they also then show the process of people making these bags in India. And it's really inspiring because, it's just a country like India developing still, and they have this awareness around it. It really inspired me. There was, like you said, less doom and gloom, but still pointing out a problem. But then here's the solution. Here's what you can do today to start minimizing this and making an impact just at home. So
Yeah. I love that. I think that's the key thing. It's like educating in a way that's inclusive and not lecturing. Really important. Acknowledging that we are all the problem and not one of us and someone else. Like, we're all the problem. Some of us more so than others, like us in the West. But we all share this. We share this world. We share this responsibility. We share hope for the future. And then look what you can do. Here's some tiny, like, really achievable things that you can do to take some control back, and here's how you can be part of the narrative. And I think that's I think that's the thing. It's like, it's really about calling in, not calling out.
That's fantastic. I like that. And not about lecturing people and making them wrong. So I know for sure, like in the past when I've been made wrong, or even today, defense walls go up.
And I've been like really, really good at lecturing in the past. And like, why don't you see? Da, 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 da. And it doesn't help. It doesn't. It doesn't. Like, for storytelling to be effective in galvanizing people to action, the intention really needs to be about uniting people. And that really, for me, is the thing that is most exciting about it as a tool, philosophy, whatever you want to call it. Because, for example, when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, one of the biggest recommendations for white people to understand the experience of people of color was to read books written by people of color. And that's what I've been doing pretty much exclusively for the past couple of years. And it has enriched my understanding of so many things: what it's like to be a person of color in this country, what it's like what it was like to live in Nigeria through the ages, people migrating to the US, what that experience was like, going back to the homeland, like all of these different things that I would never have understood if I hadn't read and absorbed stories. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I'm not an expert in any of that still, but I have a much deeper understanding now of the experiences of people who have a different experience to me. And that is really the crux of it. Like, we all have different experiences. And one of the biggest challenges is that we're not united in our understanding of one another. And storytelling is like a bridge across what can sometimes feel like a vast ocean of difference. And a way to understand that we're actually not really all that different. Like, we all have the same hopes and fears and insecurities and desires, really. But, culturally we might be different. Physically we might be different. But actually underneath all of it, we're really not that different. And that's why I think storytelling, when done well, can be just the most amazing.
That's so true. Because you are reading about people's stories that, completely different to yours. But just, I think, from human to human sharing, and that's all we are, humans sharing with another human being. And you can definitely just pick up on it, because it's like, I don't know what it does. It's like touches you here in the heart or something. But there's always something that you can relate to. So amazing. Yeah. And I guess we've touched on this a little bit, but how do you think we could then use storytelling to create or maintain commitment to a cause in the long run, rather than just motivating people like in the short term?
I think it's then about, so there's the overarching narrative of that cause, and then there's the mini narratives that come from that. So just continuing to build the momentum, continuing to invite people in to be part of the narrative development of the story. And like, for example, I'm a trustee of a lived experience recovery charity called Recovery Connections, which is based in Middlesbrough. And they've got their overarching brand story, which is all around lived experience recovery being the most impactful form of recovery, because everybody, you like, it's incredible. People go through the rehab process and then are brought into the organization. So you've got someone who was once dealing with severe coming off of heroin in this rehab center, literally like pulling sinks off walls, who a couple of years later is running the rehab center. It's like just this beautiful cycle. Yeah. And so with lived experience, it's all about building this narrative, because it's all about the stories of the people who make up the whole. And everything that they ever do is about telling the stories of those who've come through to the other side. And through that, someone who's not there yet can see, oh, it is possible. And then they're invited in, and then it's like, okay, now you can choose how you want your story to go. You can choose whether you want your story to become part of our overarching narrative. And the cycle continues and the cycle continues. But you can see how, for example, if they took a different approach and they had just psychologists, just sort of trained nurses and what have you running this rehab center, and you were always a patient or participant or addict, and I was always an expert and knew better, the dynamic is not one of shared understanding and story. It's one of, I'm here and you're here, and there's really nowhere to go from that. And I think that's what I mean. It's not just about what we say, it's about how we act. It really is like a philosophy of like inviting people in to form the story together. And this is why this organization has become one of the most prestigious worldwide for their approach to recovery, because it's all about the people who are in recovery and not hierarchical.
That's a really, really great point. My next question is, for a diverse audience, or more of a diverse audience, I also think of like my sister who's in her early 20s and my dad who's in his mid 60s, and how they react to issues like climate change, and they both do. But how do we tailor stories so that they resonate with I guess more of a diverse audience, whether it be age range, race, gender, whatever it is?
I think again that comes back down to the micro stories that we tell. The overarching narrative is going to be what the narrative is going to be. And that's important, because that's about the purpose of the organization or the purpose of the cause or the purpose of the business. And that isn't going to resonate with everybody. I think that's the 101 of marketing. It's like you're not trying to communicate with everybody. But if, from a business perspective, your story isn't going to resonate with everybody. You can be diverse in the sense of like, genders and sexual orientation and like disabilities and abilities and race and all of these things. But in terms of age and expectation across ages, it's a slightly more difficult thing to nail, I think, because you're going to have your target audience. Like Snag Tights isn't trying to appeal to a 60-year-old man, for example.
Right.
But yeah, you have to know your audience. From a bigger perspective, like a global issue like climate change, which really has its own brand and has its own story, then it's about the micro stories. So what will resonate with a younger person isn't going to be the same thing that resonates with an older person, but it doesn't mean that we can't still understand the needs of both audiences equally and have stories specifically aimed at them. So, for example, there's a lot of like, okay, boomer messaging that is blaming our parents' generation for the experience that we see today. But that's not fair. Like they didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the data to know. They were just being humans, living their lives, doing their thing. It's not fair to blame them just because they were in the kind of epicenter of the experience of being human at the time when that had the most impact. So you can imagine why so many 60-year-olds plus are feeling very defensive because
Yeah.
they're being blamed for like the demise of society.
Yeah.
It's a lot to put on their shoulders. And
It is.
equally, you can understand why somebody who's in their teens is feeling angry because they're growing up into a world that is so uncertain and so scary. So very understandable reactions on both sides, but from a very different stimulus. And so therefore, when you understand that, and again, it comes back to empathy, good storytellers have to be great empaths, I think, or if not, have to have the data to actually know what people think and how people feel. To tailor your stories depending on who you're talking to. And I think that really actually applies to when you're trying to enroll somebody into your perspective. For example, vegans. Like no vegan ever has achieved their mission by telling everybody how wrong and bad they are from eating meat. Like they haven't. If you're watching this and you have successfully converted a meat eater into becoming a vegan by telling them how bad and awful they are, then please let me know because I'd be really interested. But I don't think there really exists very many people who've managed to do that. So, but what can shift people is going, have you seen this documentary? You know, What the Milk or Seaspiracy or Cowspiracy. Have you seen these documentaries? Because this is telling you the story of these animals. This is telling you the story of the impact of this industry. Oh my God, like, I didn't know that. You're not making me wrong. I just didn't know that. Like, it's not my fault. I didn't know that. Society's brought this in, you know, but it's just a very different approach to enrolling people into a cause.
Really fantastic point, actually. The approach that we use. Yeah. And just what I'm getting is not making people wrong and really understanding people for why they take the actions they take, why they choose brands and businesses that they choose, and then knowing the greater impact. So awesome. So we are just ready to wrap up now. And I have one more question for you. So what advice would you give for businesses and brands out there so that they can use storytelling to create positive change?
Okay, so the first step is always to start with what is your purpose? Like, what is the driving force behind why you're doing what you're doing? And then understand who your audiences are and what their purpose is. And from there, like I said before, you've got the bit that meets in the middle, which is your shared purpose, your shared values. And this is where all of the gold lies, is when your business aligns with your audience's values and desires and purpose. And then use the story arc. Think about what is the status quo? What is the thing that really isn't working about why, you know, and then what's the crisis point that meant that you decided to be the solution? And then what is the solution? So when you talk about that, and you can do it, I don't mean it necessarily has to be done in like a linear way, like the status quo was this, and then there was a conflict. You can weave it into like lots of different ways. But if you try and always talk about like what was the issue that you're trying to solve and how are you trying to solve it, bringing in as many different perspectives and stories from your audiences as possible, and make it about them much more than you make it about yourself. When you've figured out what your purpose is and you've identified your own personal story as to why you've got to that point in the first place, everything else just is like a kind of hangs beneath that. That's your overarching story. And everything else is just a way of telling that story in different ways to different people, involving different people, so that you're looking at it from as many different perspectives.
This has been so insightful for me, actually, and I've not thought about like the overarching story, the overarching purpose, and then micro stories that come out of that to then reach a bit more of a diverse audience. And I really, really like that. Like, this has been really insightful. So thank you so much.
Great. You're
it's
so
been a
welcome.
great chat.
Thank you.
Sophie.
Thank you.
And no, this has been fantastic. And one last thing is like, where can people find you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And the website for Electric Peach is electricpeach.co.uk. but yeah, the best place is to connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm like,
Yeah.
I really like LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great platform actually for if you want to learn more about storytelling. LinkedIn is the place to go.
Yeah, I've really noticed this recently with LinkedIn too, and how it's evolving. It's really great, isn't it? It's just fantastic. Yeah,
it is.
So.
I'm not a huge fan of social media, but LinkedIn is. I think if you're watching this and you're a business and you're like, especially if you're in B2B and you're like, where do I focus my energy? I would say 100% LinkedIn, but not your business page, you and your personal page, and building your personal brand that then links back to your business.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
You're so
Sophie.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
This is my favorite topic of conversation.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode, give us a big thumbs up and even leave us a comment, good or bad. And if you really want to, hit that subscribe button. Check out our next video here.